first thing Iron Vale noticed was the money. Not the rain beating against the cafe windows, not the empty tables, not even the way his own hands were shaking from too much suppressant and too little sleep. It was the single bill placed on the counter by a child who looked far too young to be alone at that hour. The boy could not have been more than 6. He wore the kind of private school uniform Iron usually saw through glass windows and never up close. Every seam was neat. Every button was polished. But the child himself looked like he had run through half the city with fear chasing him from behind. Iron wiped his hands on his apron and leaned across the counter. "Hey, little one. Are you lost?" The boy did not answer. His small fingers pushed the money forward. "Can you?" His voice cracked, and his eyes flicked toward the street. "Can you be my father's Omega today?" Iron froze. For a second, he thought he had misheard. Outside, cars rolled past in silver streaks through the rain. Inside, the cafe smelled of coffee, sugar, and the faint bitter scent of suppressants leaking through Iron's skin. He had taken too many this week. Any Omega with sense would know better, but sense did not pay rent, and sense did not cover hospital bills. The boy swallowed hard. "Just for today. I can pay." Iron looked at the bill again, then back at the child's face. Rich children did not beg like that. They demanded, cried, or called drivers. This boy looked like he was bargaining for air. "What's your name?" "Knox." "Knox. Where are your parents?" The child's mouth tightened. "My father is busy. He's always busy." "And your mother?" Knox looked down. Iron did not need him to answer after that. He came around the counter slowly, careful not to startle him. "I'm Iron. You can keep your money." Knox suddenly grabbed the sleeve of his apron. The contact was small, desperate, and strangely trusting. "Please don't call anyone. They'll take me back before the family event starts." "What family event?" "At Ardan Hall. Everyone has someone coming today. Parents, guardians, bonded partners." His voice became smaller. "They said I shouldn't come if I had no Omega parent. They said people like me make others uncomfortable." Iron's jaw tightened. He knew that wordless kind of cruelty. The kind spoken by people who wore clean clothes and used polite voices while cutting someone open. In this world, alphas ruled most rooms, omegas were measured by usefulness, and people who did not fit neatly into either expectation were treated like defects. A child should never have learned that so early. Then Knox leaned closer to him, almost unconsciously, and breathed in near his wrist. Iron stiffened. "Knox!" The boy's eyes filled with tears. "Your scent doesn't hurt." Something in Iron's chest twisted. Most people barely noticed his real scent anymore. He buried it under cheap suppressants and long shifts until even he sometimes forgot what he naturally smelled like. But this child noticed. More than noticed, he clung to it like warmth. Iron looked toward the back room, where his manager was counting receipts. "I'm taking my break," he called out. His manager shouted something irritated in return, but Iron had already untied his apron. He took Knox's small hand and gave him a firm look. "I am not your father's Omega. I am not lying if anyone asks too many legal questions. But I can stand beside you today." Knox's fingers curled tightly around his. "For today. For today." Ardan Hall Academy was only a few blocks away, but it felt like another country. The gates were tall, black, and polished, with guards who looked at Iron's worn coat before they looked at his face. Beyond them, the school lawn had been transformed into a perfect little festival. White tents, warm lights, catered food, soft music, expensive perfume, and families who looked like they had been arranged for a magazine cover. The moment Iron stepped onto the grass with Knox, conversation thinned around them. He felt the stares immediately. An Omega in cheap shoes. A child from old money holding his hand. A scent that did not match the room. Knox's grip tightened. His shoulders curled inward, as if he expected every whisper to become a slap. Iron bent slightly and murmured, "Keep walking. You did nothing wrong." A woman near the refreshment table gave them a long look before smiling in a way that did not reach her eyes. Her son stood beside her, staring openly at Knox. "Well," she said, voice bright and sharp. "Knox Vermont actually came. How surprising." Iron felt the name land before he understood its full weight. Vermont. Even someone like him, who tried very hard to stay away from power, knew that name. Shipping empire. Private security. Political donations. Rumors so dark people stopped speaking when the name appeared in conversation. Knox tried to hide behind him. The woman's gaze slid over Iron. "And who is this? A hired Omega?" A few nearby parents pretended not to listen, which meant they were listening closely. Iron smiled, but there was no softness in it. "I'm the person standing with him today." How generous. Though this is a family event. Then maybe the adults here should act like family means something more than bloodline and money. The woman's face stiffened. Iron continued before she could recover. "If you have a problem with me, speak to me. Don't corner a child because it makes you feel important." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Knox looked up at Iron like he had just done something impossible. "You're not scared," he whispered. Iron squeezed his hand. "I'm working on it." That made Knox laugh. It was small at first, almost startled out of him, but it grew into something real. For the next hour, Iron let him choose everything. They painted a ceramic cup together badly. They ate little sandwiches that tasted expensive and somehow boring. Knox told him which teachers were kind and which classmates only pretended to be. Slowly, his shoulders lowered. Slowly, he stopped checking the gate every few seconds. At one point, Knox leaned against Iron's side and said, "When I'm near you, I don't feel like something is wrong with me." Iron had no clever answer to that. He only rested a hand on the boy's head and said quietly, "There is nothing wrong with you." For the first time since they met, Knox smiled without fear. Then the music stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The entire lawn seemed to lose its breath at once. Iron turned toward the gate. 3 black SUVs rolled through the entrance and stopped where cars were absolutely not supposed to stop. Doors opened in perfect sequence. Men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the crowd with the cold efficiency of people trained to end problems before they began. Then the air changed. Pressed down over the lawn, heavy and unmistakable. Pheromone. Not alpha. Not anything Iron had ever felt before. This was deeper, colder, and far more dangerous. It made several Omegas stumble back. One parent dropped a glass. Even the alphas nearby went rigid, their instincts recognizing something above them on the chain. Knox made a broken sound and grabbed Iron's coat with both hands. "He found me." From the center vehicle, a man stepped out. No one needed to announce him. The space itself seemed to make room. Cain Vermont. Enigma. Father. The man whose name had turned Knox into a trembling child. His gaze swept across the lawn once, dismissing everyone, until it landed on Knox. Then it moved to Iron. For one sharp second, Iron forgot how to breathe. Cain's expression did not change, but his pheromone did. It narrowed, focused, and wrapped around them like a warning. "Knox," he said, voice low and controlled. "Come here." Knox shook his head against Iron's side. Iron knew he should step away. Every survival instinct in his body screamed at him to move, bow, apologize, disappear. Instead, he placed himself more firmly in front of the child. Cain's eyes locked on him. "And you are?" Iron's heart hammered so hard it hurt, but his voice came out steady enough. "The person your son asked for when he was scared." The silence that followed was absolute. Cain Vermont looked at the Omega shielding his child, and for the first time, the danger in his eyes was joined by something else. Recognition. Because Knox was not crying from fear anymore. He was clinging to Iron like he had finally found somewhere safe. And Cain had clearly noticed. The drive to the Vermont estate was painfully quiet. Rain slid down the dark windows of the SUV, while the city lights blurred outside like distant ghosts. Iron sat stiffly beside Knox, trying not to react to the oppressive pheromones filling the vehicle. They were colder now than before, quieter, but still heavy enough to keep every instinct in his body alert. Across from them, Cain Vermont sat with one arm resting against the leather seat, his expression unreadable. Knox had fallen asleep 10 minutes into the ride. The child was pressed against Iron's side, fingers still tangled in the sleeve of his coat, like he was afraid waking up would make everything disappear. Iron glanced down at him before finally looking back at Cain. "You really let your kid run across the city alone?" Cain's eyes lifted slowly. "My security lost him for 9 minutes. That was enough time for him to offer strangers money to pretend they cared about him." The temperature inside the SUV seemed to drop. The bodyguard driving stared harder at the road while another man in the passenger seat subtly adjusted his posture like he expected violence at any moment. But Cain only looked at his sleeping son. "He does not trust people," he said quietly. "That sounds like a problem a 6-year-old shouldn't have." Cain's gaze shifted back to Iron. "And yet he trusted you immediately." Iron frowned. "Maybe because I treated him like a person instead of an inconvenience." For a brief second, something flickered behind Cain's cold expression. Then it vanished. The estate stood above the city behind iron gates and layers of armed security. It looked less like a home and more like a private kingdom hidden in the hills. Black vehicles lined the driveway. Guards moved silently through the property with military precision. Iron instantly wanted to leave. Places like this swallowed people whole. Knox woke up as the SUV stopped. "We're home," Cain said. The child visibly tensed. Iron noticed it immediately. Inside, the mansion was massive and spotless, but there was no warmth anywhere. No family photos. No signs that laughter existed in the building. The only proof a child lived there was a small toy abandoned near the staircase. A tall man dressed entirely in black approached them. Unlike everyone else in the mansion, his presence felt calm. "Sir." Cain nodded once. "Vale, prepare the east wing." Vale's eyes briefly shifted toward Iron and Knox before returning to Cain. "Understood." Iron crouched beside Knox. "You should get some sleep." Knox immediately grabbed his sleeve tighter. "You're leaving." "I have work tomorrow." Panic crossed the child's face so quickly it hurt to watch. "Please don't go." Before Iron could answer, Cain spoke from behind him. "Stay." Iron stood slowly and turned around. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. And what makes you think I'm interested in staying in a mansion full of armed men and emotional problems?" Cain walked closer, his expression calm but impossible to ignore. "Because you need money." Iron's jaw tightened instantly. Cain continued without hesitation. "Your mother's treatment costs are overdue. You've been working double shifts while overdosing on suppressants to hide your pheromones." Iron stared at him in disbelief. "You investigated me during the car ride?" "I investigate everyone near my son." "That's insane. That's survival." Knox tugged lightly at Iron's coat again. "Just tonight." Iron looked down at the child's exhausted face and silently cursed himself. "One night. That was all." "Fine," he muttered. "One night." Knox relaxed immediately like he had been holding his breath the entire time. Vale guided Iron upstairs while Cain disappeared down another hallway without another word. The guest room was bigger than Iron's apartment. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling window after helping Knox fall asleep, staring down at the glowing city below. His head hurt from exhaustion and suppressants, but something else bothered him more. The silence. The mansion did not feel peaceful. Felt restrained. Like something dangerous lived beneath the surface and everyone inside the house knew not to provoke it. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Vale entered carrying tea and food. "You should eat," he said. Iron eyed him suspiciously. "You're surprisingly polite for someone working under a mafia boss." Vale almost smiled. "Good manners increase survival rates." That answer somehow felt genuine. Iron sat down slowly. "What exactly is wrong with Knox?" Vale hesitated. "He inherited Enigma instability early. I thought Enigma traits usually developed later." "They do. But after his mother died, his condition worsened." "How?" "Panic attacks, violent pheromone spikes, fear of physical contact." Vale paused briefly. Most Omegas react badly around him because of his lineage. Iron frowned. He's a child. Yes, Vale answered quietly. That's the tragedy. Iron looked toward the bedroom where Nox was sleeping. And Cain. This time Vale's silence lasted longer. Sir has stronger control than most enigmas, he finally said. But control is not the same thing as stability. Before Iron could ask more, the lights flickered. Then something shattered downstairs. A second later, the entire mansion changed. The pressure hit first. Cold. Heavy. Violent. Iron's body locked up instantly as overwhelming pheromones flooded the halls. His instincts screamed danger so loudly his breathing became uneven. Somewhere below, guards were shouting. Vale cursed softly under his breath. Stay here. What's happening? Instability episode. Another crash echoed through the mansion. Then came the sound of someone breathing hard below, like they were forcing themselves not to lose control. Nox whimpered in his sleep. Without thinking, Iron moved toward the door. Vale blocked him immediately. Bad idea. If this keeps going, Nox is going to wake up terrified. And if you go down there, you could get hurt. Iron ignored him and stepped into the hallway anyway. The deeper he walked into the mansion, the stronger the pheromones became. They wrapped around his throat like invisible hands. Several guards stood outside a destroyed room downstairs, none of them willing to enter. Inside, Cain stood beside a shattered table. Blood dripped steadily from one of his hands. Broken glass covered the floor around him. For one stunned moment, Iron thought someone had attacked him. Then he realized the cuts were self-inflicted. Cain had driven shattered glass into his own palm to stay in control. The realization hit harder than Iron expected. Cain noticed him instantly. Leave. His voice was rougher now. Iron frowned. You're hurt. I said leave. The pressure in the room intensified violently. Every instinct told Iron to run. Instead, he stepped closer. Cain froze. Not from anger. From surprise. Iron's real scent had reached him through the suppressants. The effect was immediate. The unstable pheromones in the room eased slightly. The guards outside noticed. So did Vale. But Cain's expression darkened instead of relaxing. Why are you still here? He asked quietly. Iron glanced at the blood running down Cain's hand. Because you're bleeding all over your expensive floor. For the first time, something dangerously close to amusement flickered in Cain's eyes. Then another wave of instability hit him. Cain grabbed the edge of the broken table hard enough to crack wood beneath his fingers. His breathing turned uneven for half a second before he forced it back under control again. Iron stared. Not at the danger. At the restraint. Cain would rather destroy himself than lose control near his son. That mattered. More than Iron wanted it to. Cain slowly lifted his gaze toward him again. Stop taking suppressants, he said quietly. Iron blinked. What? Cain stepped closer. The scent of blood, rain, and cold pheromones wrapped around the space between them. Your real scent. His voice dropped into something dangerously raw. It's the only thing that calms me down. Iron stayed at the Vermont estate for 3 days before realizing he had already become part of its routine. By the second week, leaving no longer felt simple. Nox waited for him every morning outside the guest wing with sleepy eyes and messy clothes, always pretending he had not been standing there for several minutes already. He followed Iron through the mansion like a shadow that had finally decided it was safe enough to exist near someone. The change in the child was impossible to ignore. The panic attacks became less frequent. The nightmares eased. Even the staff whispered about how different the young heir seemed whenever Iron was nearby. For the first time in years, Nox laughed loudly enough for the sound to carry through the halls. And somehow that frightened Iron more than the danger did. Because he was getting attached. One afternoon, Iron sat cross-legged on the floor of Nox's room while helping him build a ridiculous model city out of blocks and magnetic tiles. Half the buildings leaned sideways. One bridge had already collapsed twice. Nox stared seriously at the disaster in front of them. It looks terrible. It looks ambitious, Ardan corrected. That's what people say when something is ugly. Ardan laughed before he could stop himself. Knox immediately smiled at the sound. That was another thing changing lately. The child watched Ardan constantly, as if memorizing every expression mattered. You should put the station here, Knox said, moving a piece carefully. Why there? So nobody gets left behind. The simple answer hit harder than it should have. Ardan looked at him quietly for a moment before reaching over and fixing one of the crooked buildings. No one's getting left behind today. Knox relaxed almost instantly at the words. That was when Ardan truly understood the problem. Knox was always trying to be easy to keep. Too quiet, too careful, too obedient. Like he believed love disappeared the moment he became difficult. Later that evening, Ardan found himself wandering through the mansion library, while Knox attended private lessons upstairs. The estate remained unnervingly silent most days, but the library felt different. Softer somehow. A fire burned low near the windows. Cain sat alone on one of the leather couches with documents spread across the table beside him. Ardan nearly turned around. You keep avoiding me when we're alone, Cain said without looking up. I prefer peaceful environments. And yet you stayed here. That's because your son emotionally blackmailed me. A faint trace of amusement crossed Cain's expression before disappearing again. Ardan noticed immediately how exhausted he looked. The dark circles beneath his eyes had become more visible over the last week, and tension constantly lingered in his shoulders like he had forgotten how to relax years ago. You should sleep occasionally, Ardan muttered. I do. Lying isn't attractive on you. Cain finally looked up at him properly. For one brief second, the room felt smaller. Ardan hated how aware he had become of Cain lately. The sound of his footsteps, the shift in the air whenever his pheromones changed, the way his voice lowered slightly whenever he spoke to Knox. It was dangerous noticing those things, especially because Cain still kept his distance emotionally, no matter how much his actions contradicted it. The man claimed Ardan was only there for Knox, but he had already replaced Ardan's suppressants with safer medication, paid off part of his mother's hospital debt without mentioning it, and quietly rearranged security schedules so Ardan could move through the estate without armed guards hovering nearby. He cared. He simply refused to admit it. Ardan crossed his arms. Vale told me Enigma instability worsens under stress. He talks too much. That wasn't a denial. Cain set his glass down slowly. My condition is not your concern. That's interesting. Considering your condition nearly tore apart half the mansion 3 nights ago. A dangerous silence followed. Then Cain spoke quietly. You're not afraid of me. Ardan hesitated. That's not true. Cain's eyes narrowed slightly. You're afraid, Ardan admitted. But not in the same way everyone else is. For some reason, that answer seemed to affect Cain more than anger would have. The tension broke when Knox suddenly burst into the library carrying papers in both hands. Rin! Ardan blinked. Did you just nickname me? Knox looked startled. Can't I? No, Cain answered immediately. Knox ignored him completely and shoved the papers toward Ardan instead. They picked my drawing for the Academy exhibition. Ardan smiled as he looked at the sketch. This is good. It's us. The words caught both adults off guard. The drawing was simple, clearly made by a child, but recognizable enough. Knox, Ardan, Cain, standing together, like a family. Cain went completely still. Knox noticed immediately and lowered the papers slightly. Sorry, he whispered. I know it's stupid. It's not stupid, Ardan said quickly. Knox looked uncertain. Really? Really? The child relaxed again, but Ardan did not miss the expression on Cain's face. Something about that drawing had shaken him. That night, Ardan could not sleep. The mansion was quiet except for distant rain tapping against the windows. He finally gave up around midnight and headed toward the kitchen for coffee. Halfway down the hallway, he noticed light spilling from beneath a partially open door. Cain's office. Ardan should have kept walking. Instead, Curiosity pulled him closer. Inside, Cain stood near the desk with his sleeves rolled up slightly while Vale stitched a deep cut across his side. Blood stained the edge of his shirt. Iron frowned immediately and pushed the door open wider. What happened? Vale looked mildly horrified that he had been caught. Cain barely reacted. Work. That answer means absolutely nothing. It means you should go back to bed. Iron ignored him and walked closer anyway. The cut looked painful enough to require hospital treatment. You're injured. I noticed. You could at least pretend to care. Cain's mouth twitched faintly. Vale finished wrapping the injury before quietly excusing himself from the room, clearly deciding the conversation was no longer his problem. The silence afterward felt strangely intimate. Iron stood near the desk while Cain buttoned his shirt again. That was when he noticed the scars. Not one or two. Dozens. Old knife wounds. Bullet scars. Damage layered over years like physical proof that Cain had survived things no one should survive. Before thinking better of it, Iron reached out and lightly touched one near his collarbone. Cain froze instantly. Does it still hurt? Iron asked softly. Cain looked down at his hand against the scar. I don't remember. The answer hurt more than if he had admitted pain. Iron's fingers lingered there for half a second longer. People are supposed to remember things like that. Cain slowly lifted his eyes to him. For the first time since meeting him, Iron saw something terrifyingly human beneath the cold control. Loneliness. The moment shattered when alarms suddenly echoed through the estate. Both men snapped toward the hallway. Vale's voice came sharply through the intercom. Sir, guests have arrived early for tomorrow's banquet. Cain's expression darkened immediately. The banquet, Iron repeated. A political gathering, Cain answered coldly. The kind involving people who smile while deciding who becomes disposable next. That sounds exhausting. It is. The next evening, the estate transformed completely. Politicians, executives, powerful alphas, dangerous people wrapped in expensive clothing and fake manners. Iron already hated every second of it. He stayed near the edge of the ballroom while Knox remained upstairs with security. Cain moved through the crowd effortlessly, calm and untouchable, but Iron noticed how every conversation subtly revolved around dominance. Power recognized power, and everyone in the room feared Cain. Then a tall alpha approached Iron with an overly charming smile. You must be the Omega everyone's talking about. Iron immediately disliked him. And you must be the reason warning labels exist. The alpha laughed before stepping closer than necessary. You know, I've been curious about your scent all evening. The moment his pheromones intentionally pushed forward, Iron's body stiffened. Wrong. Too aggressive. Too invasive. Before he could step away, another presence slammed into the room. Cold. Violent. Terrifying. The entire ballroom went silent. Cain stood across the room staring directly at them. And for the first time since meeting him, Iron realized something dangerous. Cain Vermont was jealous. The silence after the banquet felt worse than the confrontation itself. Iron stood alone on the balcony outside the ballroom, trying to steady his breathing while cold night air pressed against his overheated skin. The alpha's pheromones had faded minutes ago, but the lingering discomfort remained. No, not discomfort. Fear. Not of the alpha. Of Cain. Because the look in the Enigma's eyes across that ballroom had not been simple anger. It had been something darker, sharper, and dangerously possessive. The balcony doors slid open behind him. Iron did not need to turn around to know who it was. You left without permission, Cain said calmly. Iron let out a dry laugh. I didn't realize I was a prisoner. You're under my protection. That sounds disturbingly similar. Cain stepped closer, and the familiar cold pressure of his pheromones wrapped around the space between them. It should have frightened Iron by now, but somehow it only made his pulse louder. That alpha touched you intentionally, Cain said. He barely brushed my arm. He pushed pheromones at you, and you nearly terrified an entire ballroom because of it. A dangerous silence followed. Ardan finally turned around. Cain stood only a few feet away now, still dressed in black from the banquet, still impossibly composed on the surface. But his control looked thinner tonight, more fragile. "Do you know what he wanted?" Cain asked quietly. Ardan crossed his arms. "To annoy you? To provoke me? And congratulations. It worked." For the first time, irritation cracked through Cain's calm expression. "You continue to underestimate how dangerous this world is. And you continue to think fear solves everything." Cain moved suddenly. Not violently. Fast. 1 second there was distance between them, and the next Ardan's back was against the balcony wall with Cain standing directly in front of him. The air turned heavy instantly. Ardan's breath caught. Cain lowered his head slightly, close enough that Ardan could feel the warmth of his breathing near his neck. "You smell like another alpha," Cain said roughly. The possessiveness in his voice sent heat through Ardan's entire body before he could stop it. "That's not my fault." "No," Cain murmured. "It's mine for allowing him near you." Ardan swallowed hard. Every instinct in his body screamed that this was dangerous territory, but another part of him could not ignore the way Cain was trembling slightly beneath all that control. Not from rage. Restraint. Cain closed his eyes briefly and rested his forehead against Ardan's shoulder. The movement was so unexpected that Ardan froze. "You make me lose control," Cain admitted quietly. The confession hit harder than shouting ever could have. Ardan slowly lifted one hand and grabbed the front of Cain's jacket before he could think better of it. Then he kissed him. It lasted only a few seconds. Short, careful, breathless. But the effect was immediate. Cain went completely still. Ardan realized what he had done half a second too late. He pulled back instantly, heart pounding hard enough to hurt. Cain stared at him silently. The cold control in his expression had vanished entirely. For the first time since meeting him, Ardan saw raw hunger underneath. Not purely physical. Emotional. Like Cain had been starving for something he did not know how to ask for. Then footsteps echoed inside the ballroom. The moment shattered. Cain stepped back immediately, his expression sealing shut again. "Go to your room," he said coldly. Ardan frowned. "Seriously? Now?" The sudden distance stung more than it should have. By the next morning, Cain had disappeared on business before sunrise. And somehow that hurt too. 3 days passed. Then 5. The mansion became quieter without him, but tension lingered beneath everything. Guards moved more aggressively through the estate. Vale spent most of his time answering calls behind closed doors. Even Knox noticed something was wrong. "Is father angry?" the child asked one evening while sitting beside Ardan in the library. "Why would you think that?" "Because everyone gets quieter when he's angry." Ardan looked down at him carefully. "Does that happen often?" Knox hesitated before nodding slowly. That answer sat heavily in Ardan's chest. Later that night, Ardan found Vale standing outside Cain's office with a grim expression. "What's going on?" Ardan asked. Vale looked exhausted. "Internal conflict. That sounds vague on purpose. There are people within the organization who believe Sir has become distracted." Ardan immediately understood what that meant. "Because of me." Vale did not deny it. A cold feeling settled in Ardan's stomach. Who exactly are these people? Serac Dane among them. Ardan had heard the name before from servants whispering quietly in hallways. Cain's second in command. Ruthless, ambitious, loyal only to power. What does he want? Vale's expression darkened slightly. Enigmas are feared because instability makes them unpredictable. Serac believes fear is useful. He thinks Sir has become weak for trying to restrain himself. And what does Cain think? Vale looked toward the office door. Sir thinks Knox deserves a better future than this. That answer stayed with Ardan long after the conversation ended. Because somewhere along the way, Cain had stopped feeling like a monster living inside the mansion. He felt trapped inside it too. The attack happened 2 nights later. Ardan woke up to alarms. Not the controlled security alerts he had heard before. These were louder.
urgent,
violent. He sat up instantly. The hallway outside exploded with shouting. Knox. Iron rushed into the child's room without thinking. Knox was already awake, terrified and shaking hard enough that his teeth clicked together. Rin. I'm here. Gunshots echoed somewhere below. The mansion lights flickered once before emergency systems activated, bathing the halls in red. Iron grabbed Knox's hand. We're getting out of here. But before they reached the door, it burst open. 3 armed men stormed inside. Knox cried out in fear and immediately hid behind Iron. One of the men grabbed Iron roughly by the arm. Found them. Iron fought instantly, shoving Knox behind him while trying to wrench free. Don't touch him. Another gunshot echoed downstairs. Then a familiar voice entered the room calmly. Alive, Serac said. The child too. The men stepped aside. Serac Dane walked inside wearing an immaculate suit despite the chaos around him. His expression remained relaxed, almost amused, as he studied Iron. So this is the Omega. Iron glared at him. You broke into a house full of children and guards just to say hello? Serac smiled faintly. Cain has always had terrible judgment when emotions are involved. Knox pressed closer against Iron's back, trembling violently. Serac noticed immediately. Interesting, he murmured. Even the boy reacts differently around you. Iron's instincts screamed danger. This man felt wrong in a completely different way than Cain did. Cain's presence was heavy but restrained. Serac looked like someone who enjoyed cruelty. The man holding Iron suddenly tightened his grip painfully. Then everything changed. A sharp burning sensation tore through Iron's body. His eyes widened. Suppressants. The injector hidden beneath his sleeve had shattered during the struggle. Cold panic flooded him instantly. No. Serac noticed the shift in his expression immediately. Understanding spread slowly across his face. Well, he said softly, that complicates things. Heat hit Iron like fire under his skin. His knees nearly buckled. The pheromones escaping his body changed the entire room instantly. The armed men stiffened. Knox looked terrified. Iron's breathing turned uneven as his body reacted violently without suppressants. He had not experienced a true heat in years, and now it crashed into him all at once. Serac stepped closer slowly. So that's why Cain became obsessed. Iron backed away immediately, dragging Knox with him. Stay away from us. But Serac only watched him with growing fascination. Do you know what you are? He asked quietly. A resonance omega capable of calming an enigma is rarer than most people realize. Another wave of heat slammed through Iron hard enough to blur his vision. Knox suddenly grabbed him tightly. You smell hurt, the child whispered fearfully. That nearly broke him. Then the entire mansion shook. Not from explosions. From pheromones. Cold. Violent. Terrifying. Every person in the room froze instantly. Iron's breath caught. Cain. The pressure flooding the mansion was no longer restrained. It was furious. For the first time since meeting him, Iron understood why the underworld feared enigmas. Because this felt less like a man arriving and more like a natural disaster breaking through the walls. Somewhere downstairs, screaming erupted. Serac's smile finally disappeared. And despite the heat tearing through his body, despite the fear and chaos and danger surrounding him, Iron nearly cried from relief. Because Cain had come for him. The first thing Iron noticed when Cain entered the room was the silence. Not because the mansion had become quiet, but because every person inside it had stopped breathing at the same time. The pressure of an enigma's pheromones flooded the air so heavily that even armed alphas instinctively stepped backward. The walls themselves seemed to tremble beneath the weight of Cain's rage as he walked through the ruined doorway with blood staining one sleeve of his black coat. Then his eyes found Iron. Everything else disappeared from his attention immediately. The men holding Iron reacted too slowly. One of them shoved Iron forward while raising his weapon toward Cain, but the shot never landed. Cain crossed the distance between them with terrifying speed, and seconds later the gunman crashed against the wall hard enough to leave blood across the marble floor. Iron instinctively pulled Knox closer against his chest before the child could look. "It's okay," he whispered quickly, even though nothing about this situation was okay anymore. Cain stood in the middle of the destroyed room breathing hard, his control hanging by a thread. The pheromones surrounding him no longer felt cold and restrained like before. They felt violent now, unstable in a way that made everyone nearby visibly nervous. Then Cain looked directly at Iron again. The shift in his expression was immediate. Rage gave way to panic the moment he noticed Iron trembling. "What happened?" Cain asked sharply. Iron struggled to steady his breathing. The suppressants broke. For the first time since entering the room, Cain looked genuinely afraid. Serac noticed it too. The older man stepped forward slowly, completely calm despite the chaos around him. "There it is," he said quietly. "The weakness I warned everyone about." Cain's gaze moved toward him with enough hostility to make the guards nearest the door retreat another step. "You brought armed men into my home," Cain said. "Near my son." Serac gave a small shrug. "Your judgment has been compromised for months now. Everyone in the organization can see it. You were once feared because you understood power mattered more than attachment. And you think terror makes you strong? I think love makes people predictable." Iron could already feel the heat worsening beneath his skin. Without suppressants, every instinct in his body felt painfully exposed. The scent of his pheromones mixed dangerously with Cain's unstable presence, thick enough to affect the entire room. Knox looked terrified. Not of Cain. Of losing him. The child suddenly grabbed the sleeve of Cain's coat with shaking hands. "Please stop fighting." That single sentence changed something in Cain immediately. Iron saw it happen in real time. The fury in Cain's expression cracked just enough for exhaustion to show through instead. Serac noticed too, and his voice became colder. "Look at yourself." An enigma feared across the entire West Coast, brought to his knees by a child and an Omega. Cain slowly crouched in front of Knox without taking his eyes off Serac. "You should leave the room," he told the child quietly. Knox shook his head immediately. "No, Knox. I don't want you to disappear again." The words landed harder than any weapon could have. Cain went completely still. Iron felt his chest tighten painfully as he looked down at the child clinging to Cain's sleeve. Knox was trying not to cry, but fear had already started breaking through his voice. "I don't care about the house," Knox whispered. "I don't care about the people downstairs. I just want you and Rin to stay." For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then Serac laughed softly. "This is exactly why enigmas should never pretend to be human." Cain stood slowly. When he spoke again, his voice had become frighteningly calm. "You killed her because she wanted to leave." Serac's smile faded slightly. Iron looked between them in confusion before realization slowly settled into place. Knox's mother. Serac sighed as if discussing an old inconvenience. She became emotional. She wanted to run away with the child before he inherited his birthright. "You know as well as I do that weakness spreads." Knox stared at him in horror. Cain's hands curled tightly enough that blood began dripping from his injured palm again. For the first time since meeting him, Iron truly understood how much control Cain usually maintained over himself. The violence inside him had always existed. He had simply spent years chaining it down. Serac stepped closer. "You built this empire because you understood fear. Do not destroy everything now because an Omega soothed your instincts." Cain looked at Iron briefly before answering. "He did more than that." The room fell silent again. Cain's voice lowered slightly, but every word landed with crushing weight. "He made my son laugh again." Iron felt his breath catch. "He made this house feel like something other than a prison," Cain continued. "And for the first time in years, Knox stopped looking at me like he expected me to vanish." Serac's expression hardened. "You're willing to destroy your entire organization over this?" Cain finally turned fully toward him. "No," he answered quietly. "I'm willing to destroy it because I finally understand what it destroyed first." Something shifted in the room after that. The loyalty of several guards visibly wavered. Some lowered their weapons. Others looked uncertain for the first time since the attack began. Serac noticed immediately. "You're making a mistake." Cain's expression became cold again, but this time it was different. Cleaner. More certain. "No," he said. "I made mistakes when I convinced myself power could protect people." Without warning, Serac reached for his gun. The shot rang through the room. Iron instinctively pulled Knox downward while chaos erupted again around them. Guards moved. Furniture shattered. Someone screamed downstairs. But Cain never hesitated. By the time the noise settled, Serac was on the floor bleeding heavily beside the broken remains of the desk. Cain stood over him breathing hard. Serac stared upward with disbelief. "You would really abandon everything for them?" Cain looked toward Iron and Knox before answering. "For the first time in my life," he said quietly, "I finally have something worth being human for." Serac laughed weakly before blood filled his mouth. Then his body went still. The silence afterward felt unreal. Knox buried his face against Iron immediately, shaking hard from fear and exhaustion. Iron held him tightly while watching Cain stand alone in the middle of the destroyed room. The most feared enigma in the city suddenly looked unbearably tired. Hours later, federal agents flooded the estate. Not because they had discovered the organization themselves, but because Cain had called them personally. Vale stared at him in stunned disbelief while encrypted files, financial records, and criminal ledgers were carried out of the mansion, one after another. "You're really doing this," Vale said quietly. Cain removed the signet ring from his hand and placed it on the desk beside him. "Yes. The entire empire will collapse." "It should." Iron stood silently nearby while Knox slept against his shoulder upstairs. He watched Cain hand over everything he had built without hesitation. Shipping routes, political connections, underground accounts, corrupt officials, every secret. Years of power disappeared in a single night. When the final agents finally left near sunrise, the mansion felt emptier than ever before. Cain stepped onto the balcony outside the ruined office and stared down at the city below. Iron walked over slowly before stopping beside him. "You just destroyed your entire life," he said quietly. Cain looked at him for a long moment. Then his gaze softened in a way Iron had never seen before. "No," Cain answered. "I destroyed the thing that was keeping me from having one." The ocean sounded different from the city. In Los Angeles, noise never truly disappeared. Sirens echoed through the streets at all hours. Traffic crawled endlessly beneath glowing buildings, and danger always felt close enough to touch. Even silence there carried tension inside it. But here, the waves rolled against the shore with slow, steady rhythm, like the world had finally remembered how to breathe. Iron stood behind the counter of the small beachfront cafe and watched early morning sunlight spill across the windows while coffee beans roasted in the kitchen behind him. The shop was quiet except for soft music playing from an old speaker and the occasional cry of gulls outside. It still felt unreal sometimes. No armed guards. No political dinners. No pheromones heavy enough to suffocate entire rooms. Just peace. A loud crash shattered the calm from the back kitchen. Iron closed his eyes immediately. "Please tell me that wasn't another mug." "It survived," Cain answered. Pause followed. "Mostly." Iron sighed as he walked toward the kitchen. 3 months ago, the idea of Cain Vermont wearing a plain black sweater while failing to operate an espresso machine would have sounded ridiculous. Now it had somehow become part of Iron's normal life. The former Enigma kingpin stood near the counter holding a badly overfilled cup while coffee dripped across the floor. "You're doing that on purpose," Iron said. "I survived international crime syndicates. Nobody prepared me for foam ratios. You're losing a fight against steamed milk." Cain looked genuinely offended by that. Iron laughed before taking the cup from him. Moments like this still caught him off guard sometimes. The version of Cain that existed now felt almost impossible compared to the man who once ruled entire rooms through fear alone. The dangerous edges were still there. They always would be. But now Ardan saw the exhaustion underneath them, the protectiveness, the quiet effort Cain put into rebuilding himself every single day. Most importantly, Knox saw it too. The sound of small footsteps raced down the stairs from the apartment above the cafe. Rin! Knox practically launched himself across the room before stopping abruptly near Cain. Father burned breakfast again. Cain frowned slightly. Burned is a strong word. There was smoke. It was controlled smoke. Knox immediately looked at Ardan with complete seriousness. He's lying. Ardan laughed again as he ruffled the child's hair. Knox had changed the most since leaving Los Angeles. The nightmares became less frequent until they eventually stopped altogether. The constant tension in his small body slowly disappeared. He no longer flinched when people approached him unexpectedly, and for the first time in his life, he had started making friends at school. More importantly, he had stopped trying so hard to be perfect. One rainy evening 2 weeks earlier, Knox had accidentally broken a glass while helping Ardan close the cafe. The child froze immediately afterward, pale with panic like he expected someone to disappear because of it. Instead, Ardan simply cleaned the mess while Cain calmly handed Knox another towel. No shouting. No fear. No punishment. Knox cried afterward anyway, not because he was scared, because he finally understood mistakes would not make people leave him anymore. The realization nearly broke Ardan's heart. Later that afternoon, after the breakfast disaster had finally been cleaned up, Ardan sat outside the cafe with paperwork spread across the table, while Knox played near the shoreline collecting shells. Cain stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. One of these is drinkable, he said. That's progress. Cain sat beside him quietly. The ocean breeze moved through the silence between them comfortably now. Months ago, Ardan would have expected tension every time Cain got close. Possessiveness. Pressure. The dangerous instability that once followed him everywhere. But things had changed after the bond formed. Not magically. Cain still struggled sometimes. There were nights when old instincts resurfaced, especially after stress or exhaustion. But he no longer fought those moments alone. And for the first time in years, his pheromones no longer felt violent. They felt safe. Ardan looked down at the faint mark near his collarbone where Cain had bonded with him. At first, he had been terrified of it. Not because of pain. Not because of instinct. Because deep down, Ardan had spent most of his life believing people only stayed while he was useful. The moment he stopped giving them something valuable, they would leave. That belief had followed him for years. But Cain shattered it slowly through actions instead of promises. He stayed when Ardan argued with him. Stayed when Ardan doubted him. Stayed even after losing everything else. Cain noticed him staring at the bond mark and reached over quietly, brushing his thumb against the skin beneath it. You're thinking too loudly again. That's rich coming from someone who once treated emotional repression like a personality trait. A faint smile appeared on Cain's face. Ardan still found that smile unfairly distracting. Before either of them could continue, Knox suddenly came sprinting back toward the cafe with sand covering his shoes. Look what I found. He held up a crooked shell proudly. Ardan took it carefully. This might be the ugliest shell I've ever seen. Knox gasped dramatically. Father, Rin insulted my treasure. Cain examined the shell seriously. I think it has character. You're both impossible. Knox grinned before climbing into the chair beside them. For a while, nobody spoke. The 3 of them simply sat there listening to the ocean. Peace still felt fragile sometimes, like something they had borrowed instead of earned. But little by little, it started feeling real. That evening, after closing the cafe, Ardan walked down toward the shoreline alone, while the sky turned orange over the water. He heard footsteps behind him moments later. Cain stopped beside him holding something folded in his hand. What is it? Instead of answering immediately, Cain placed the worn bill carefully into Ardan's palm. The same money Knox had pushed across the cafe counter months ago. Ardan stared at it silently. He kept it? He asked softly. Cain nodded once. Knox said it was the day everything changed. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Ardan's chest. The ocean wind moved gently around them while sunset painted gold across the waves. Cain looked at him quietly before speaking. My son used that money because he was afraid nobody would stay without being paid to. Ardan's throat tightened. Cain stepped closer. But you stayed anyway. The softness in his voice nearly hurt more than the confession itself. Cain reached up slowly and brushed his fingers against the bond mark near Ardan's neck before leaning down to press a gentle kiss against it. Not desperate. Not possessive. Just warm. Just real. For the first time in my life, Cain said quietly, this feels like home. Ardan looked at him for a long moment before smiling softly. It is home. A second later, Knox came running down the beach toward them yelling about dinner and almost crashing directly into Cain's side. The three of them laughed at the same time, and standing there beneath the fading sunlight with the ocean stretching endlessly before them, Ardan realized something important. None of them had saved each other alone. They survived because every one of them chose to stay. And maybe that was the real meaning of family in the end. Not blood, power, or fate, but the people who chose to stay beside you when everything else fell apart. Thank you for listening to the story, and if you enjoyed the journey of Cain, Ardan, and Knox, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay for more emotional audio stories.